David Hanlon said, "More lunge stuff. I dare ya." Thanks, mate. Game on. Preach! Testify! Well, I'm not going to lie. I've been feeling a bit under the weather recently, and so I haven't had the flow of thoughts that I normally have. I reckon I'm just going to give you some training footage and do a voiceover. Plus, I've been getting the occasional comment about my audio, so I threw my credit card like a boomerang at the problem. Dropped a full £8 on a mic. Hope to get about £7.50's worth. You let me know if it was a wise investment. Now, I don't really like doing the videos where I show me training because, well, I'm trying to get you all to focus on yourselves. I don't want you watching me and judging yourselves by what I'm doing. You're the important ones, not me. But sometimes you get ill, and sickness saps the creativity. Now, my view is, even when you're ill, you gotta keep training to provide the stimulus so that your body wants to beat the illness and get you back to where you were before. Also, you do have to keep working though to pay the bills. Something's gotta give, so please forgive the lower quality of info maybe in this video. Now, I want to do a bit of a mop-up and disinfect of a few comments that needed a little bit more of a reply than just a couple of paragraphs like I normally write. Firstly, there are two questions that I want to deal with regarding the lunge. Now, there was a simple point that now's just up and vanished from the comments section like Trump's promise to be tough on the banks. It was saying that the lunge wouldn't help sprinting because of the vector forces. Basically, the lunge doesn't encourage enough push from the back, so it wouldn't really translate to top speed sprinting. And I read this and I thought, I think that's a misunderstanding of what I'm talking about with weights. Now, the best way to get faster is not to lift weights. The best way to get faster is to sprint. End of. Full stop. Period. Sprinters can run sub 10.5 without weights. Sprinting is all you need to run super fast. Don't be tricked. The point of the lunge is not to make you run faster. Now, it might. That's not the point. It's to re-establish the hip and pelvis body balance that the athlete had before they started doing all that heavy squatting. That's why I gave the yoga example. Now, if you rebalance your body, that's going to allow you to sprint faster. And hopefully, you're not going to think I've gone nutty if I say that a body that's operating properly will sprint faster. If you're squat or quad dominant, then you're going to have good acceleration, but you're going to lack top speed because top speed is glute and hamstring dominant. And if you're quad dominant, that could well set up potential injury risks for your hamstrings because the glute's just not strong enough in unilateral action, so the hamstring has to do two jobs. Now, lunges, if done a particular way, are great for the glutes, which takes a strain off the hamstrings. You reduce the risk of injury, and that then allows you to train more. See, you've got to remember, the biggest limiting factor to sprinters is injury. That's the number one deal breaker, not the need to lift an extra 5 kilos to be world class. So I hope that clears that up. Now, the second point is that sprinting mechanics is about what happens in front of the body, not behind it. Now, this is a much bigger topic and it's really more about cueing. Not about standing in a queue or pool play, but about the words or images that you have to communicate to someone to get them to see what they need to do. Sprinting is in fact the entire gait cycle. It's all important, but athletes present with different problems in their gait cycle. Now, this is a horrible generalization and probably nonsense, but I've noticed that most athletes that are running over 11 seconds and want to get to 10 seconds are okay at the front, but they're underdeveloped in the back part of the gait cycle. Most athletes that run 12 seconds plus need to work on the front and the back of the gait cycle. Now, most weights exercises, if performed correctly, focus on the front part of the gait cycle. If you do them poorly, you're going to get poor transfer. But if you do them well, maybe you get good transfer. Who can tell? But there's a very limited selection of weights exercises for the back part of the cycle, and they normally require quite a lot of kit
and fiddling around. The lunge, if done a specific way, can aid the back part of the cycle. That leads me to the second topic, or the third point. I don't know where I am now. There's a difference between the bodybuilder lunge and the sprinter's lunge, and they're not to be confused. These are two different movements. Don't be thinking they're the same, because they're 100% not. The bodybuilder lunge, or the lunge taught by personal trainers who've all been indoctrinated into the bodybuilding methodology, wiki religion if ever I've seen one. Nah, not really. It's alright. Is a quad-based exercise. The back knee drops in line with the torso to the floor. This means that the front leg muscle is doing a lot of the work. It's a sort of 1 foot supported half squat if you think about it. Because of this very tight position of the back leg, the front knee has to travel over the toe to create the space. Now for those that lack the dorsiflexion, this is going to put them on their forefoot. But we know, because it's written in the holy texts, that the muscles you load first, you load greatest. So you're loading up the quad and the knee's traveling forward, which is fine. But you're stopping when the back knee hits the floor and the front knee's at about 90 degrees, which coincidentally is where the shearing force is greatest on the knee. So that's why you see folks crossing themselves and praying for their kneecaps whenever they start themselves a bodybuilding lunge session. The Holy Spirit's whispering in their ear that they're genuflexing their way towards an expensive knee surgery. Now the sprinter's lunge is a totally different affair. Firstly, the primary move is the hip descending, not the knee traveling forward. That means you're loading the hip first, and therefore the hip most, not your knackered knees. Secondly, you're encouraging as much rear leg hip hyperextension as possible. Now, this gives you more space for the front leg, which minimizes the knee travel. It also strengthens the quad, so they're long and strong. Obviously, you've got to keep your eyes peeled for lumbar hyperextension, but you avoid that by actively turning on your low ab, and that re-neutralizes the pelvis. Now the issue about the knee stopping at 90 is still there, and yeah, this is the greatest shear force on the knee, so if you load yourself up like a donkey, your knees are going to feel it. Personally, my knees start to give me some feedback and I feel like an ass after about 110 kilos. But to be fair, that may be because my technique changes as the weights go up and I find it harder to get the same drive out with each step. Now, this means the movement becomes more knee first than hip first, and maybe I'm morphing slightly more into a bodybuilder lunge. And we won't want that. Now the way to know this would actually be to use cones to more accurately judge the stride length consistency as the weight was increasing. But that does require a partner in crime though. But also, cones on the ground cause random people to appear from nowhere asking you about what you're doing, which rapidly devolves into the story of the training that they're not doing, which then has a net effect of stopping you from doing any training. QED, cones, stop training. Must be treated with suspicion. Clowns, fine. Fear cones. Ooh, and here's a track tip. People's non-training stories of woe act like a virus if you're not careful. It can infect your session, so here are 2 ways out. The diplomat method. You say, don't worry about it. I'll do enough training for both of us today. And then quickly get on. That works about 80% of the time. Failing that, if they continue to talk, you drop your head, snap your fingers, and moonwalk away. 7 steps, polish it off with a half spin, and then ow! Anyway, back to lunges. Now, I don't want you guys to all suddenly think that heavy lunges is the key and lose focus on the sprinting. So I'm going to finish off with a quick story about lunges that a friend shared with me in the style of Simon Bates from Radio 1. This is a story of Billy's 2011 season. He's given his real name, but I've changed it because I don't want any bad repercussions for him, and he's had enough pain as it is. Billy was an athlete who trained 4 times a week. He wanted so badly to emulate his idol Michael Johnson and be a great 400-meter runner. His best time was 52.99, but he knew in his heart that with the right help, he could run much faster. His best 100-meter time was 11.38, but he didn't focus on it, only running it twice a season. He was a good kid with a big heart and even bigger dreams. As luck would have it, with the new season approaching, a new coach moved to town, Mr. Zimmer. Now, by all accounts, he had a very good reputation and he came to Billy's club. He'd coached some real talent back from where he was from and attracted a lot of attention, but had to leave suddenly. No one knew why. But Mr. Zimmer was charismatic and charming, and Billy fell hard. Seduced by the intoxicating thoughts of athletics fame, he felt honored when Mr. Zimmer allowed him to join the group. Now, you know, in these coach-athlete relationships, if that's not too insensitive a word, there's a power dynamic. Mr. Zimmer knew how to get that control, giving with one hand and taking with the other. He started to erode Billy's self-confidence by telling him that he was too short and too heavy for the 400, although Billy was average height and only about 70 kilos at the time. Billy started to doubt himself. But Zimmer, having delivered that blow, offered a metaphorical tissue to wipe away the tears with some advice that Billy should specialize in the 100 and the 200. He gave back Billy some hope that he could run 10.9 and low 22s. Now that's a textbook move to gain control of Billy's mind. Billy started with Zimmer in November, having taken a couple of months to sort out some injury problems from the year before. At the beginning of the season, he had good glute activation. He'd do his lunge sessions and he'd feel dead sore in the glutes afterwards. He did an intro comp just to see where his base level was after the couple of months off, and he ran a 7.36 for 60 meters with a poor start. It gave him a lot of confidence. He then gave himself to Zimmer for a full 12 weeks of Zimmer's system. But he threw himself into training to please coach. He started training 6 times a week, doing whatever he was told. He was doing 2 power weight sessions with lunges, step-ups and half squats. He had bits of plyometrics and after that some sled runs. He was doing 1 session a week of pure speed and 1 session of sled drags. He was doing 1 speed endurance session and 1 session of just plyometrics. Whatever was written down, he did it. He turned up. He gave everything to gain Zimmer's approval. Obviously, Billy didn't see it that way. He thought he was just doing what he had to do to be great, and with that much training around power, how could he not progress? He was smashing his PBs on bounds and in the weights room. He was growing into a real animal in the gym and on the AstroTurf. He went from a 70-kilo half squat in sets to about 130 kilos. He went from 30-kilo lunges to 80-kilo walking lunges. Keen to cash in his chips and see what he'd won, he hit up a competition at the beginning of March. He wanted that new PB that had to be waiting for him in the 60. He got a great start, tore out of the blocks and crossed the line with 7.42. He was 600th slower. After the race, Billy gave some serious thought to going back to his car, donning a balaclava and going on an athletics jihad, but decided to stop off at Mackie D's instead and pick up a Royale with cheese. He went over to Zimmer's house, which was out in the sticks, and found Zimmer sitting on the couch in a vest. When Billy explained about the race, Zimmer had the audacity to say that he thought he was going to run more like 7.1 or 7.2. Again, it was a mind game. Zimmer was skilled. He was saying that Billy had talent while subtly telling him that he hadn't lived up to expectation. This clever trick took the focus off his training ideas, put it back on Billy. And Billy was left in a position where if he accepted the compliment, it meant he also had to accept that the failure was his. Yet again, Zimmer could then be that ray of hope that Billy so desperately needed. Zimmer did the equivalent of a verbal shimmy slide with the excuse that he wasn't training Billy for the indoors, and times would come in the outdoors. So Billy continued to train with all of his will and might, and Zimmer would dance around, proud as an expectant dad, pointing out that Billy's legs and especially the quads had doubled in size during the winter, totally ignoring the fact that Billy's backside was still as flat as a can of 3-day-old Pepsi. And a further 5 months later, as August wound down, marking the end of the outdoor season, and with all of those improvements and gains in the gym, Billy was met with a 100-meter time of 11.38. Again, the same time he'd run the year before. As he drove back from the competition, thoughts and emotions were spinning around in Billy's head. He'd done everything he could. He'd given his all and totally committed. He'd done everything that Zimmer had asked, and now finally, as autumn approached, Billy needed some answers. As Billy got to the outskirts of town, it started to lightly rain, making the road slippery. It was getting dark, and Billy drove down the windy dirt road to see Mr. Zimmer. He needed to know what had happened, but as he approached his house, he noticed the lights were off. He went up to the door and knocked. No reply. He went round the back to where a key was left under the mat. It was gone. All that was left was an outline. As he peered into the grimy back window, an old crumpled newspaper slowly fluttered across the kitchen floor, wafted by a draft, and as he looked up, he saw a rusty sieve in the sink. He was gone, moved out, disappeared. No one knew where. Billy asked the neighbours and was told that Zimmer had been seen rapidly packing his belongings that afternoon. When asked where he was going, Zimmer just replied with dead eyes. East, maybe. It's a big country out there. A lot of dreams. Billy returned to his car, stunned, not knowing what to think, and sat there for what felt like an hour. Finally, just to break the swirling emotions and thoughts in his head, he turned on the radio. He twisted the dial to try and find some answers, and this came on.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
That's a true story. Well, radio true. And yeah, listening to that, I could offer an explanation saying, well, the ratio was still out from the squat to the lunge. You know, the lunge was only about 61% of the squat. But I think that's only a small part of the problem. While ratios are important, I'd say that the reason why heavy weights work for one and not for others is because weight is a way you can increase activation, not the way to increase activation. And weights is actually a way you can decrease activation and take your body out of its natural ratios if you do a weights exercise like the lunge in a way that doesn't activate the muscles that you want. In this case, the glutes. So remember, it's not the weight that matters anywhere near as much as it is the muscles that you use to lift that weight. And coincidentally, for what it's worth, that's why I stop when I do. I'm trying to keep a correct ratio and trying to do the exercise to work my glutes. As soon as I start to feel other muscles kicking in to take the extra weight, rather than the glutes activate more to handle that extra weight, that's time to stop. And that's also why I'll redo a set that I don't think is up to the standard that I want it to be. I'm using each set as feedback. If the set's a standard, I move on. If it's not, then I do it again to try and teach myself how to do it to standard. Basically, I just see sets as more practice to learn how to improve it. If it improves, then I move on. But if it doesn't, I stay with it to master it, however many sessions that might take. And so in this session, I stop at 130 kilos because I think I need more time to master this level. Anyway, I hope that something in all of this helps. Bust me a thumbs up, because let me tell you something.
Makes me feel good.
Chat and yap away in the comments bay, and if you like my vibe, please subscribe.